We are live.
Hello, welcome to Green Card with Gehi and Green Card with Greg.
Yes, I've commandeered the podcast. It's now Green Card with Greg.
Yes, so welcome. I'm attorney Suriya Rahman from Gehi and Associates. As I mentioned, we have attorney Greg Ippolito with us today. We're going to talk about citizenship. So many things to talk about. We'll discuss everything one by one, and of course we will take your questions, any questions you might have. As you know, we have 3 offices, all in Queens, New York. We have one in Ozone Park. We have an office in Jamaica, and our main office is in Jackson Heights, New York. You can see our numbers on the screen. You can call us for consultation. We are available for phone consultations. If you're not in the New York area, we have clients all over the world. So we would be happy to speak to you about your case, about your immigration matter. So let's get started. So we can start with the citizenship form. And of course, I just want to remind everyone that any of the topics discussed are not intended to be advice for any particular person. It's general information. You should not rely on any of this information to make decisions about your own case, because this is general information. Everyone's case is different, depending on their history, immigration history, their criminal history. So it is not intended to be relied on for any specific case. Okay, so we can start with the N-400 form, and I will pull that up in just a second. Okay, so this is the page on the USCIS website. USCIS is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. They are responsible for receiving and adjudicating citizenship applications. So this is their page. As you can see, they have an online filing option. And you can also apply in the old school paper format. You can download the form here. There's further instructions here, and it looks like they even have a video here for you to view and find out more information about the citizenship online application. So let's go ahead and open the application. Okay, so it is a 20-page application, and we'll go in section by section. Greg, you want to talk about part 1 of the application?
Sure. So basic qualifications for when you can become a citizen is you have a legal permanent residency or a green card for 5 years, or 3 years if you received your green card, legal permanent residency, through a U.S. citizen spouse. So keep that in mind. If you were granted asylum or you had another type of family petition, you have to wait 5 years before you can apply to be a citizen. Unless you are married to a U.S. citizen, and that's how you procured your legal permanent residency, then you only have to wait 3 years to apply. So this form is actually quite easy to understand. A lot of them can be kind of complicated with USCIS, but they want to know your basic information, where you've lived. There's a residency requirement. You should be living in the United States and residing here. And there's also other, they want to know your divorces, marriage, family, children. It's very important to just be accurate, tell them everything. You don't want to, confuse them at all. Okay, so right here, eligibility. So this is just your basic eligibility, like I just said, 5 years or 3 years. And that's pretty straightforward. Okay, and then the rest is, part 2 is, your information. When you apply for citizenship, USCIS uses it as an opportunity to open up your full immigration record, make sure everything's accurate, there's no mistakes or issues. Commonly, we have a lot of clients that they've had their green card for 20, 30 years, and it's very easy to reapply. USCIS doesn't always reopen your entire file when you just, renew your green card. When you apply for citizenship, keep in mind they will reopen your entire file, analyze it, look for any discrepancies, any issues, and you might be asked about them.
Yeah, those are all really good points. So if let's say somebody is eligible to apply for citizenship after 5 years, do they have to wait for exactly 5 years to pass, or is there some leeway for early filing?
There's, to my knowledge, there's some leeway for early filing. I believe it's 3 months. Is that correct, Suriya?
Yeah,
Okay.
So if you're eligible to apply after 5 years, you can actually apply after you've had your green card for 4 years and 9 months. And if you're eligible based on the 3-year rule, you can apply after 2 years and 9 months. So what about a VAWA applicant? What if somebody received their green card through VAWA? They are eligible to apply under the 3-year rule. They don't have to wait for the 5 years. So they can also apply for citizenship after 3 years, 2 years and 9 months. So those are some things to keep in mind. Also, if you're applying under the 3-year rule based on marriage to a US citizen, at your citizenship interview, you have to present bona fides. So you'll have to come prepared with evidence that you're still living with your US citizen spouse at the time of the interview, up until the time of the interview and the 3 years before. One key distinction about the 3-year rule is that your partner must have been a US citizen for the full 3 years. So if your partner if your spouse becomes a citizen 2 years after you've had your green card, you can apply under the 3-year rule. They have to have been a US citizen for the full 3 years prior to applying.
Okay.
Yeah. So this part 2 is pretty self-explanatory. It's information about the person applying for asylum, their name, their social security number, etc. One nice feature about the citizenship application is at the same time you're applying for citizenship, you can legally change your name. So this is a good time if you go by a nickname and you want to make that your legal name, you can do that. If you want to change the spelling of your name, now's the time to do it. Okay, and then at the bottom here of section 2, there are some exemptions for the test that comes along with applying for citizenship, and it's based on your age and how long you've had your green card. So if you meet these requirements, you can either be exempted from the test totally, and that's part C, and this is discretionary. Or if you meet A or B, which is the 50-20 rule or the 55-15 rule, you can take the civics test in your native language.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
sir, what are the differences the differences between the English language test and the civics test. Are you exempted from both, or do you have to do one and not the other?
So the difference between the civics test and the English language test is that the civics test, there's a bank of about 100 questions, which are also available on the USCIS website. And you will be tested. It's, they're questions about civics, about form of government, about US history. So it's a bank of 100 questions. They can't ask you anything outside of those 100 questions. You have to get 6 out of 10 of those correctly to pass. That's the civics test. The English test is reading, writing, and speaking English. So for parts A and B, you're exempted from the English test altogether. You only have to take the civics test.
You
And
still have to take the civics test.
Yes, and you can take it in your own, in your native language.
In your native language, okay. So I also see this medical exemption
Mhm.
for issues.
Yeah, so you want to talk a little bit about your experience with
The 648?
Yeah.
Yes, so we have many clients that have had their green card for years, and they're older now and they are disabled, right? And as Suriya just went over this, you're not necessarily exempted from the civics portion, okay? So what we do is we have them go to a doctor, and there's a form, and it's recently been clarified, which is very good news. Because previously it was extremely complicated and very difficult for even the doctors to understand. And we frequently see denials, but it's since been simplified. And you need to submit it with your N400 application. You cannot send it later. It will upset USCIS. You can still discretionarily accept it, but it's a lot less likely. So we encourage you to submit the medical waiver with your citizenship application. Okay, so commonly what we see when we go on these interviews is they will, even though you've submitted this application, this waiver for medical issues such as, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. I've had clients with cancer, and they're unable to answer the civics questions. We commonly see the officer still make a try. Okay, and this is nothing to be worried about. We just advise our client to just give it their best try, and then they will accept the waiver. It's very important you get a good doctor to review it thoroughly and answer the questions very specifically. Otherwise, it could be denied. So, and that's something we do all the time is we review it. Make sure the doctor answered everything specifically and objectively, and no room for error. So there's something else I'd like to add in from my own personal experience, is that commonly when we go on these interviews, we have, the doctor does a really good job of explaining all the medical issues, whether it's Alzheimer's, other dementia, Parkinson's, and why they can't do these civics questions. However, there is a requirement at the oath ceremony that you have to fully understand the oath of becoming a United States citizen and what that means. So if your medical waiver shows that you're incapable of understanding the oath, that's a separate problem, okay? You need to be able to understand the oath. And sometimes officers will try and trip you up saying, okay, well, the applicant is from the form, you're saying that they're so disabled and they can't understand and they can't understand anything, but you're also saying that they can understand the citizenship oath. And so you have to explain that well, how they're unable to learn, to study the questions and provide answers, but they're still cognizant enough to understand and accept the oath of becoming a citizen. Correct?
Yeah, that's, and Greg, you go to these interviews at least once a week, so you really have the best working knowledge as to what happens. And so, and generally speaking, are the officers accommodating when there's medical
Yes.
exemption?
Yes. So as long as you do things, we've had some cases where we were unable to get the medical waiver sent out with the N400 application. It depends on the officer. My experience with USCIS is that the officers are there to help you, and especially with a citizenship interview. It's a joyous occasion. Everyone is very happy, but they just need to make sure everything's done the right way. 9 times out of 10, the officer's on your side, just wants to make sure everything's in order and is happy to approve your application. But just make sure it's done correctly, because they usually have to report to their boss. And so we urge you to do everything correctly.
Right, yeah, and what I've noticed is that the office, once the medical exemption is accepted, they are very accommodating. But in reviewing the medical exemption, they're very strict, and they scrutinize the medical exemption a lot. So if there's one tiny thing that's missing, one explanation that's not missing, they will deny it, and they will try to test you, and if you fail it, they'll schedule you for a second interview. Okay. So part 4 is contact information. That's self-explanatory. Part 5 is residence information, also self-explanatory. Okay, there's part 6, information about parents. Why do they ask about your parents? The reason that they ask about your parents is because there is law that allows for a person to derive citizenship from their parents and even from their grandparents. So they're just making sure, and if that's the case, you can't, N400 is not the right form for you. It's a different form. So they are asking these questions to make sure that you are not already a citizen by operation of law, because for example, your mother or your father became a citizen before you're 18 years old. So that's just a kind of like a general rule. There's more exceptions and nuances to derivative citizenship, but generally speaking, that's why they ask these questions here. Okay, part 7 is biographic information, also self-explanatory. It's really redundant since they take your biometrics when you file the application, but it's there. Information, part 8 is information about your employment in schools. They want to know what you've been doing for the past 5 years. Okay, part 9, time outside the United States. You want to take this section, Greg?
Yes. So when you have legal permanent residency, your green card, you have to be a resident of the United States. We see all too often people, they spend too much time outside of the United States, and it's called legal permanent residency abandonment. So for your citizenship application, the N400, you have to have been resided in the United States for over half the year for the past 5 years. And they want to know how many trips you took outside, and it's fine. You can go on vacation, as much as you want, as long as you're still considered a resident of the United States, which is usually over half the year you're in the United States. Now, there are some exceptions to this. On occasion, we have to argue that they're still residents, especially due to COVID. People got stuck outside of the country for the majority of a year. So we'll draft a memo and maintain their residency. Things USCIS will look for is, did they still have a job in the United States? Were they still paying rent in the United States? And other ties to the United States, even though they were outside for over 6 months. But please, it's another reason you want to consult an attorney, is you don't want to file this application and then find out you've abandoned your green card.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That would be a good opportunity just to segue before you finish. I'd like to, add on. We see many cases in immigration court, removal proceedings, where, as I stated earlier, when you apply for your citizenship, they reopen everything. So they check fingerprints. They review everything. So we see a lot of people end up in immigration court because they committed a crime years ago that everyone forgot about. But when they're applying for citizenship, it pops back up, and it was a deportable crime. We also see a lot of cases where people are accused of committing immigration fraud, and they're fined for 20 years. They have their green cards, they have their families, and they say, well, I want to be a citizen. I love this country. I've been here forever. I want to be a citizen. And USCIS will uncover immigration fraud that happened 30 years ago. And so if you have any, suspicions, questions, concerns, please tell your attorney everything. Some of these can be dealt with, fixed very easily. So it's very important you tell us everything and consult with us, because this could be a very happy moment when you become a citizen. But if you make a mistake, or if you've made a mistake in the past, it could cause you problems. You will definitely need an immigration attorney.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that's no reason to be scared. Please, these are,
That's why we're here. That's why we're here. We'll make the process
yes.
less scary.
So, commonly, I could just bring up an example. There's different categories for visa applicants. If you're unmarried, you get, and someone petitions for you, it's a quicker route, right? So sometimes people are married, but they say, well, I'm unmarried, or we had one case where between the application and them coming to the United States, they got married, and they left out. They didn't update their evidence. And when they wanted to become a citizen, USCIS, you committed fraud. You did not tell us you were married. You got a quicker visa date. And we have to fight that. So it could be little things you didn't think about, innocent mistakes that USCIS will scrutinize.
Yes, we've seen that far too often, where these kind of things pop up where our client did not even know that there were issues.
No.
Okay, so part 10, it asks about marital history. And why would they ask about marital history? So as Greg brought up before, they are going to dig into your green card file and see how it is that you got your green card. If you got your green card through marriage, they will certainly want to know who your current spouse is, who your previous spouse was, and they're going to use that information to connect any dots that might be that they might think raises issues of fraud. But sometimes immigration thinks that they might suspect fraud, but also life happens. Sometimes people rekindle their relationships with their ex-spouses. It happens. Sometimes life is a soap opera, and these
Yes.
kind of things just happen. Maybe because of the kids, you know. So that's why this section is in here about your marital history. Okay, information about your children. USCIS might use this information to compare what you listed in your green card application to see if you listed those children there. And also see if, there are any red flags that are raised by that. Okay, part 12 is additional information. So this is where they ask all the questions about things that might disqualify you from citizenship. So that includes claiming to be a US citizen. That is a bar. If you ever represented yourself as a US citizen, that is a bar, not only from citizenship, but from any kind of immigration benefit. Voting is a form of representing that you're a US citizen. So it's really tricky, especially with in New York State, they passed a law where non-citizens can vote in local elections. So it gets really tricky. Of course, we advise that, we don't advise anything in this show. We're just taking note of, that might be a very tricky situation. There's a little bit of conflict between federal and state law there, and especially how it impacts an application for citizenship. So, it should be done with caution. Okay, so there's additional questions here about taxes. They want to make sure that you are current on your taxes. That might mean you're on a payment plan, and that's perfectly fine if you're paying according to the plan to the IRS. They want to know if you ever said that you don't live in the United States, that you're a non-resident for tax purposes. They want to know if you're a part of any groups, and what is this, the point of this information. They want to make sure that you're not part of any organization that is contradictory to supporting the US form of government, or things along those lines. And they'll compare it. For example, if you got your green card through asylum, they're going to compare your answers during your asylum, the groups that you said that you claimed that you were part of when you filed your asylum application, and what are the groups that you're a part of now. These are just general questions about torture, genocide, things that we hope no one has been involved in.
But we do have cases. I mean, I don't remember if we discussed this or not on the last episode, but we had the recent case with the client that was in the Mujahideen.
Yeah.
Fighting for America.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah, that was an interesting case.
Yeah, and yeah, he was part of that, but it was a very complex case. Yes, that's correct. Yes, we won't get into details of that case.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, and then arrest history. So, Greg, you want to talk a little bit more about this section?
Yes. Okay. So this is very important. If you have any criminal record, please go to an attorney and allow us to give you a formal opinion. There's some crimes that you may have been convicted of or arrested for, and might not sound bad, but it could be if it's considered a crime involving moral turpitude or an aggravated felony. In the end, it will go down to discretion. You usually, if you're not, unless you're barred, if you have any arrests, it'll usually go down to discretion. There's a 5-year statutory period where you need to show good moral character. And so if you have a lot of arrests, even if they're dismissed, it could still cause you problems. So when this happens, we usually have kind of, counter evidence to show that you're really a good person, even though you do have a couple arrests. Criminal bars on US citizenship is if you committed 2 or more crimes involving moral turpitude, or 1 crime involving moral turpitude. 2 would make you removable. Excuse me. So if that's any crime that's considered a crime involving moral turpitude, you are likely barred. This can go to discretion in some cases. There are exceptions. One is the petty offense exception. That's if the crime was punishable by less than a year in confinement, and you were sentenced to less than 6 months, I believe. I might have to double check that, but I believe that's what it is. But when we're looking at these discretionary issues, it's good to kind of have other evidence of good moral character that can help the officer look favorably upon in your application.
Right, and a lot of times the laws regarding which conviction will bar you from citizenship and which ones won't, that law is changing from time to time. If you apply at one time, maybe a conviction for petty larceny might hold you back from citizenship, but now it might not. So again, it's very important to speak to a qualified attorney, to speak to an experienced attorney about your criminal record if you have one. And before you apply for citizenship, it's very important. You don't want to apply for citizenship and end up in deportation proceedings. Okay, so the next section, it's a continuation of part 12. They're asking questions about things that might bar a person from citizenship. So it's more questions about your moral turpitude, drugs, prostitution, breaking the law in other ways, gambling. Okay, so this is a tricky question as well. It's the question about selective service. So if you are a male who lived in the United States between your 18th and 26th birthday, you are required to register for selective service. If you don't recall, we can help you look up whether you signed up or not. If you didn't, there are exceptions, and of course, we can help you with that. Okay, and this last section here is to make sure your ideologies and align with the US government and the form of government. So that's what this section is about. And then part 13 is the your signature certification that you're telling the truth. If you used an interpreter, their information. If you used an attorney or a preparer, their information goes here. And then the rest of it is, signatures that are completed at the interview. So that's generally the application itself. It is a form which seems simple enough to fill out, but the legal guidance and the laws behind it are very complex, and sometimes require legal guidance, and we are here for that. So procedurally, how does it work? You file the application, let's say you file it online, or maybe you file a paper version. Procedurally, Greg, you want to talk about what happens after you file the application?
Yes, so what happens after we file the application, I like to get everything perfect, organized, and easy for the officer to digest when they're reviewing it. So we'll usually have a cover letter, show all the evidence we need, any forms, like marriage licenses, criminal dispositions, records. And once we send it out, we will usually within 2 weeks to 2 months get a receipt with a number on it, and it'll give you a receipt number, and you can look that up online on the USCIS website, and it'll tell you that it's processing. If there's any issues, they'll send what's called a request for evidence, or RFE, and they'll ask for additional evidence, depending on what they feel they need. Okay. And if everything goes well, you'll be given an interview date. If it doesn't go well, you could be given what's called a notice of intent to deny. And that's another opportunity for you to explain yourself, any issues, and they'll list reasons why they would deny you. We thinking of denying you for this reason. I see you didn't submit a marriage license. We want to know what that is. We can't approve it unless you submit this. And the interview, like I said, it's usually a very happy moment. Everyone's excited. The officers are usually very compassionate and understandable. They're accommodating if you're in a wheelchair, if you have any health issues. It's usually a happy time. So if for some reason it's denied, you can ask for it to be reviewed at a hearing. Okay. Right, was that 336? What form is that? It is 336. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I looked at Suriya to confirm any if you hear any hesitation in my voice.
Confirm things you already know.
Yeah, it's like I'm just not 100% sure, so I looked at her, to make sure I'm correct.
So when you file, and then at the time you get the receipt notice, you also get a biometrics notice. So you might have to go into an application support center, ASC, to go and to give your fingerprints, and they take a photo of you. Sometimes they waive the biometrics, and if they do that, you'll get a notice saying, we already have your fingerprints on file, and we'll just run them again. You don't need to come in again to do that. Then right now we're seeing interview dates in New York. Sometimes our clients get them right away within a few months, 2-3 months. Otherwise, they come in around 8 months. That's the average that we've seen typically. So then you go to the interview. If you don't pass either the English or the civics test, you do get a second opportunity to take the English and civics test within 100 and I believe it's 3 months. So you'll get another date exactly after 3 months to come in and try again to take the test. Or if you, suffer a medical issue, you can submit the medical waiver form. So generally speaking, why would a person want to take an attorney with them to a citizenship interview? Greg, what difference has it made to have for your clients to have you there during the citizenship interview? Can you give some examples?
Yes, so I can, plenty of examples. Sometimes things are confusing, and having an attorney there will make sure everything is clarified. If acting on documents or evidence, I'm there to make a note and explain it. I say an attorney is necessary if anything goes wrong, because I'm there to hear it, to listen to it, and to fight it. If they say, if you're unfortunate and you have an officer that's either not understanding things or is being difficult, I'm there to fight it. Okay, I'm there to say, you don't have to answer that. This is what this is what you need to say, and have it organized. If for some reason you're denied, I'm going to know exactly why. We won't have to go on, on a wild goose chase to figure out the reasons why. I will know. And another reason to just bring an attorney with you is because you're very excited when you're going to go on this interview. Okay, you're going to be a little bit nervous. You might say something that is not accurate and not in your favor. I use this story a lot. I had one client, they asked you, have you ever received weapons training or been a part of any organization that has received weapons training? And the client said yes. And I looked, we were all very confused. And, he was trying to be honest, right? So the officer was like, yes, you received weapons training or are part of like a paramilitary group with weapons? And technically he was correct, but it was inaccurate. The group he was talking about was the Boy Scouts. And as a child, he was in the Boy Scouts, and it could have created a big problem, but he was telling the truth. He received weapons training and was part of a group. They went and shot clay pigeons. And he was telling the truth, completely honest, but it was wrong. It was, precise but inaccurate.
Right.
And having me there, I was able to quickly say, whoa, let's slow down. What troop you're talking of, how, and it turned out it was just the Boy Scouts. That could have led to his application being denied.
Yeah, absolutely. And what another reason I want to cite for taking an attorney to your interview is if you are exempt from the civics or the English test, to have an attorney that speaks your language. For example, Greg speaks Spanish. I speak Bengali. So for somebody who is exempt from those tests, it is beneficial to have an attorney to go in with you, again, who can explain the process, who can kind of, the attorney can't translate, but they can certainly legally guide you and give you advice as to what's going on in a language that you can understand. We also have attorneys that speak Hindi and Urdu. So, that is another reason that an attorney appearing with you at your citizenship interview might lead to success.
Yeah, just on that note with the translation, USCIS does the best they can. Their officers the vast majority are extremely professional. But I've been on several interviews where the interpreter was not as proficient in the language as they claim to be. And it could have caused them to, could cause issues. So having me there, I was able to say, hey, this interpreter is clearly not doing, their job correctly. They don't know the language. We need a new interpreter. And that's, been far too frequently we come in and they tell us, interview, my application was denied. And we have to kind of put together, the puzzle and figure out what really happened. If we're there, I already know, and we can resolve it before it happens. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's say you did your citizenship application and it got denied. what are your options? So we discussed very briefly before, the next step would be to appeal that denial, and that's done on the N336. That's an application for appeal hearing. So you'll get another chance to present any evidence to counter the decision, their reason for denying your citizenship application. If that does not work, the next step is actually to ask for a federal judge to review the application, to do a de novo review of the denial. That means that they will not look at what was they're going to make a new decision to either deny or approve your citizenship application. So we have taken cases to federal court. We have been successful in taking cases to federal court. A lot of times, you know, the law is very nuanced, and different offices, unfortunately, as much as we would like the law to be applied uniformly between all offices in all states, the reality is sometimes they're not. Policies are applied differently from office to office, and sometimes they're applied unfairly. So if you have a denial and you appealed it, or you haven't appealed it yet, we would love to look at your denial and see if there's a basis to appeal or take it to federal court. I wouldn't say we love suing the federal government, but it's certainly one of our more interesting cases. So please come and talk to us about that. Okay, so we have some questions here. We've answered many of them. Do I need a lawyer to apply for citizenship? You don't need one, but as we discussed earlier, there are many advantages to having one. You have legal guidance, and you know, there are many reasons, as we discussed before. Does USCIS publish the naturalization test questions? Yes, they do. It's on the same website that I had shared before. It's uscis.gov. The questions are on there. Okay. Will USCIS approve my N400 application once I pass the reading, writing, and civics portion of the test? Not necessarily, because that's not the only requirement. There's residency requirements, there's good moral character requirements. They're going to look at your immigration file to see if there are any inconsistencies. So yes and no. Okay, next question. Can I legally change my name? We talked about this a little earlier today. Oh, while it's pending, while your application is pending, yes, even if you didn't mark the name change request on your initial application, at the interview, the officer will ask you to confirm whether or not you want to change your name. So you will have another opportunity to change your name at the interview. Okay, so we've covered a lot today. So again, my name is Suriya Rahman. I'm the lead attorney at Gehi and Associates. We had with us today Gregory Ippolito. He's the managing attorney of the Ozone Park office. We have 3 branches: Jackson Heights, Jamaica, Ozone Park. Regardless, we're available for consultation for immigration for anyone in the United States, all over the world. So please give us a call. We'd love to meet you in person. We can do a Zoom consultation. We can do WhatsApp consultations. And we'd love to talk to you about your citizenship case or any other immigration issue you might have. You can reach us at the numbers that are listed. Yeah, give us a call. We hope our show was informative. We will be taking a 2-week break for the holidays for Christmas and New Year. And we will have our next show on January 6th in the new year, 2023. And we will be discussing 601A waivers. So we hope to see you then. Have a great holiday.
Yes.
Yeah.
All
Thank you.
right, take care, everyone. Happy holidays. to
Happy
those-
holidays.
And we'll be back.
Yes.
Okay, in the new year.
Yes. Goodbye.